So welcome everybody to a program called Black and White Identity Stages in Activism. I'm Suzanne Zilber and so happy to be with all my MUUSAites. And this is Nellie.
Hey everybody.
And you'll learn a little bit more about us as we go. And we want to focus that we are centering this program on the work of a Black female psychologist named Janet Helms, who graduated from Iowa State University Counseling Psychology in 1975. So this is a special connection for us. Okay, next slide, Nellie. I want to express our gratitude to Margaret and Ellie and Carolyn. And we are sending this to you from Ames, Iowa. So we will acknowledge that we are presenting from the stolen land of the Iowa people. And we're going to pretend that I have a candle and I can't see myself. So I don't, we're going to do this little chalice lighting. There is no greater power than a community discovering what it cares about. And clearly, the Unitarian Universalist community cares about Black justice and working together as Blacks and whites and other people of color to achieve change. So go ahead to the next slide. So tonight we're going to just introduce you to our contributors, share a few assumptions about the model, and then Nellie and I will alternate in sharing these stages. And she will share the stages for Black identity and I will share the white identity stages. Then we'll open up the chat room where you can just put your name in there saying you want to make a comment or you want to ask a question, and then we'll call on you and then you can unmute. And I understand that since there's nobody after us, we could go a little bit longer with our discussion, and Nellie and I are happy to do that. But if you need to leave right at 10 to 9, you're welcome to do that. And then there's a handout that I wrote that's a more generalizable model that's not just about Blacks and whites, but could include other groups. And the Adult Planning Council will send that handout to you after our workshop. Okay. All right. So Nellie, take it away.
All right. So we were lucky enough to have many contributors for tonight's event. One of them is Morgan. She is a 21-year-old cisgender woman. She's Black, lesbian, and is a rising senior in psychology and studio art.
Charlotte, do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Charlotte Zilberman. I am Suzanne's daughter. I am a 25-year-old cisgender woman. I'm white, straight, and I am a rising second-year doctoral student in statistics at the University of Michigan. And I also grew up attending MUUSA.
Thank you.
Thanks, Charlotte. We also have Jen Major, who is a 30-year-old cisgender woman. She identifies as Black, straight, and will complete her doctorate from Iowa State in counseling psychology in August 1st. She will be the social justice postdoc at the University of Delaware's Counseling Center. And of course, I'm Nellie. I'm 21 and I identify as a cisgender Black woman. I'm straight. And I'm a rising fifth year in the doctoral program here in the counseling psychology program at Iowa State.
Okay. And I'm Suzanne Zilber, a 56-year-old cisgender woman, white, bisexual, and I am in private practice. Nellie and I lead a women's therapy group together, and we mutually supervise each other. So, all right. All right, so some assumptions that we're making as we share this with you is that if we know more about how people process through coping with the reality of racism, how do Blacks cope with that and develop over time, and how do whites do that, that then when you are actually in an organization with somebody or working on a march or writing something, that you'll be able to look at, oh, okay, this person's in this place in their development and I can accept that and I recognize it and I'm gonna adapt what I do to fit with who they are right now, and not sort of judge it, but just to sort of acknowledge it and become effective in what you do. So it's really important right now, we've really got a movement that we work well together. And then, as I referred earlier, these models can apply to other forms of cultural oppression and dominance. We are centering on anti-Black racism because of what's happening right now.
Yeah, and as we stated before, we're going to be talking about 5 different stages for the Black identity development, and we're going to have 6 different stages for the white identity development. And as Suzanne just said, I think it's important to remember that people may be at different stages for different types of identities, because these could be applied to different types of cultural oppressions. And that people don't go through these stages in a linear pattern. Oftentimes we can cycle through them multiple times, and it's even possible to be at different stages at once, especially when we're talking about racial identity development. When the person in power especially is at a less advanced stage, there's usually more conflict and more damage that can occur in the relationship. So we'll go ahead and get started then with the first stage of the Black identity development. First though, I wanna highlight the fact that we're going to be using terminology from Dr. Helms, but we also recognize that this terminology can be a little bit jargony. But we wanted to respect her intellectual labor. So we'll have her, the terms as the title there, but in parentheses, and as we'll be talking about it too, hopefully it will be making it simpler for you all. But yeah, so the first stage, conformity. I want to sort of take us back to the basics with this. First thing to remember, right, this race is a social construct. As is anything that deals with society, it is impacted by culture. So when we talk about the conformity stage, then what we're really talking about is, for people that identify as Black or African American, it's a devaluing of your own culture in favor of the culture of the majority group, which is the white group in the United States, for example. And that can look differently for different people. For me in particular, what that looked like, it looked like ignorance that then fed into disbelief of my family members' experiences of race. So to give you an example of that, my dad and I had a pattern of engaging in interactions around race, where he would come home really frustrated about something that happened at work, and especially with white colleagues, and he would talk about feeling disrespected and feeling insulted about his experiences. And this even applied when we would have uncles or anybody who came over to the house and shared a story about this, and there's usually a conversation that would erupt around race. And my dad would go into what I used to call rants about the need to be careful around white people, the need to take care to protect yourself around white people. And I remember as a kid interpreting that as paranoia. And I would say to my dad, and I would say to them, like, why are you all always so paranoid into thinking that white people wish you ill? What's wrong with you all? Like, look at me. And I will use me as an example. And at that time, I was in the 7th grade. The story that I'm thinking about right now, I was in the 7th grade. And I would think, look at me and my group of friends. I have a Vietnamese Buddhist friend. Her name was Dana. I have a Jewish Russian friend. His name was Roman. I have a Jehovah's Witness Peruvian friend. His name was Oscar. And I have a white American whose name was Nathan. And I'm like, we're so diverse. Racism doesn't exist anymore. Look at us. We're so great. And my dad, being the kind man and understanding man that he is, he will look at me and smile broadly and say, I'm so happy for you. I'm so glad that you have that. And then he would add, but remember to be careful. And me, in my mind, I would just be like, oh, this old man, he doesn't get it, because that's the mentality that I had. And this really brings me to a trademark of the conformity stage, which is when you are in this stage, you are blind to the fact that you are in that stage. You are oblivious to the things that you don't know yet. And it's not really until there's an event that happens that shocks you out of that stage that you realize that, oh, there was something that I did not understand. There was something that I was missing. So obliviousness is really an important marker of conformity or naivete or being naive.
Thank you, Nellie. Thank you, Nellie. And one of the things I want to point out to folks is that you may notice that there's these two teeny little vertical lines between the photo of the speaker and the slide. And we would like for you to experience more of us and less of the blue jargony stuff. So if you put your mouse, I guess, Nellie, we can't really show you how to do it maybe, but if you put your mouse, if you put your mouse right between the two and then pull to the left, you'll see us a little bit bigger. So that's just up to you how big you want to see us. And I am not coming up on the screen, so I don't know if people are seeing me or not.
We can see you.
You see me? Okay, good. Okay. So, all right. So for this first stage of contact naivete for white people, there's just sort of an assumption that white culture and values are what's normal. And there's no awareness that there may be power differences. And for me, I am, was born in 1963, and then in this suburb of Shaker Heights, Ohio, which was one of the first intentionally racially integrated cities in the country. And yet, there is a deeper history for Shaker Heights with that it was designed for executives to live in and have this wonderful public transportation to take them to downtown. So I grew up with little Black friends, but also Black women who were our maids who did domestic labor in our house. And my mom had 4 children. She did not work outside the home. And so I didn't think anything of this, that I had Black friends and that we had Black domestic workers. It was just the way it was. I liked everybody. And it wasn't until I was around 4 that something happened, and some of you in the class workshop recognized the story that took me out of the naive stage when she brought her daughter over and we played on the swing set, and I thought, wait, who's taking care of her while her mom is taking care of me? So that was the way to move out of that stage. And Nellie's going to talk about the next stage for Black.
So when we're talking about conformity or the naive state, I mentioned you don't really get out of this stage until there's really an event that shocks you out of it. And dissonance is really that stage. Dissonance is reflected by a feeling of confusion. There's something that happens in your life, an event, an interaction that challenges old belief systems. It introduces a new way of thinking that disrupts the way that you used to think or the reality that you used to have. And that level of confusion then sort of holds you. And people react to it in different ways. So we have a story from Morgan about her 8th grade experience, and I would like to read that for you all now. Let me see. So Morgan said, when I was in 8th grade, I attended a predominantly white school. The day after Obama was elected for his 2nd term, a classmate, Max, he said to me and my dad were taking bets on how long it would take for him to get assassinated. Other students also said things their parents said as proxies for how they felt. By that time, I knew what racism looked like. I knew what it sounded like. I felt angry that day, partly because it was the first time I heard someone say the N-word with such vitriol. It was the first time I heard it from my peer group. When I heard it from an older white person, I thought, they're old people. But to hear it from another 14-year-old was just crazy to me. I felt a lot of confusion because I thought, even if you don't like someone, why would you want them dead? Why can't you just ignore them? So that was Morgan's experience. Mine was a little less concrete. Mine was just a feeling of not belonging. And this happened quite late in life for me. This happened during my undergrad. And I always sort of prided myself in being able to fit in and being outgoing and making friends easily. So it just surprised me how much I wasn't fitting in my predominantly white institution. And as I was saying, people react to it differently. For me, for example, what that looked like was depression. And I actually sort of isolated quite a lot, which is not at all my personality, which is not at all my tendencies. And it took another event for me to get out of this stage, which I will talk about later.
Thank you. All right, so for whites, that when we become aware of racism and that we are participating in that racism, and we want to think of ourselves as good people, but we feel this tension and this discomfort around the moral question of what it means to have racist thoughts and beliefs. And in her book, White Fragility, Robin DiAngelo does a good job of saying why people are so defensive about receiving feedback that something they've done has had a racist impact or has a racist implication. And that's because we've had this binary of you're either good, not racist, or bad, like KKK racist, when really we're all on a continuum of how much we have absorbed, maybe worked through, are acting out the racism consciously or unconsciously. And so if we have this understanding that, yes, it's like impossible not to have racist thoughts, and it's impossible not to have a racist impact in the way our culture is so steeped in it, then when we get a correction, we don't have to be defensive. But in this stage, it feels very threatening to be confronted with this, and it causes tension within the person. And I'm going to have Charlotte share her story, and then I'll share a little bit more details.
Okay. Wait, just make sure. This is my childhood story.
Yeah.
Okay. So I had been friends with a Black girl, Devin, and a Black boy, Marcus, from my infant care setting, so in early childhood, and liked them a lot and didn't think much about it. But I did remember recognizing that I thought they probably had a different experience, maybe growing up than me. But then the school districts changed in my hometown, and 2 Black kids started coming to my elementary school. They were in my class in 5th grade. And I remember hearing them swearing on the playground. And this felt like a very different behavior from my white peers in my class. And I felt negatively about these Black students who swore. And I carried this feeling about, I think, what I thought of as a certain kind of Black person who behaved in this way that felt differently to me for a while. And this continued to be exacerbated by how people in my community in Ames, Iowa spoke about the Black community in Ames.
Thank you, Charlotte. So you can sort of sense that Charlotte felt a little uncomfortable that she had this sort of judgmental stance towards these other students. And so sometimes when we are struggling with guilt, we may act in ways that are trying not to be racist, but are racist in their impact, such as over-identifying with the other group. So it could be like white boys who totally get into rap music and want to dress like that. Or when I was in graduate school, I was talking with my Black roommate who had also grown up in Cleveland. And in my high school, there was a lot of leadership of Black students. They were very popular. I liked the Black students. They were fun. And so I actually said to my roommate, I think it would be fun to be Black. And then she looked at me and she said, no, no, you wouldn't like the whole package of being Black. And so that was a very important learning moment for me. You know, we talk about sometimes we exoticize other groups, and I was sort of guilty of doing that. Another form of negative behavior would be being paternalistic in approaching a way to help Black people, as opposed, so sort of doing to as opposed to doing with, and deciding what we think is important and trying to get Black people to fit our value system and our behaviors. Another thing that can happen from this stage is simply a retreat. Like you feel embarrassed, and you know, in Iowa, there's a big wish to not offend anybody. And so, well, it's too risky. I don't want to offend anybody. I'm just going to retreat back into my white group of friends. So if you do the first two options, over-identifying or being paternalistic, you may also experience some pushback for that and then go, oh, this is just too hard. And I know that people are feeling right now that there are a lot of double binds for whites about how we're supposed to be helpful, and that can cause frustration as well and cause a retreat. So I think we want to persist. All right, Nellie.
Let's see. There we go. This third stage is a bit of a mouthful. It's immersion, immersion. And I think I want to start by sort of describing the terminology first. So let's start with the second word, immersion. And I want you to picture essentially emerging outside of a body of water. And you can think of that body of water almost suffocating you and you coming out and taking a deep breath. And for me, what that symbolized is essentially emerging out of ignorance and taking like a big gulp of air of finally realizing what is happening, the complexity of race. And then the first term, immersion, is this submerging into a desire to learn more about my culture, about Black culture. And that can look differently for different people, and it can look like in engaging into more Black activities, whether that's joining Black-centered groups, reading more books about written by Black authors, watching more movies, listening to more music from Black artists, engaging in contexts that are more relevant to your culture. And it can even look like changing your group friends, for example, and choosing to engage more with people that look like you. And I think sometimes it can be easy to dismiss that or to judge that, but I think it's important to remember that this choice to be around people that look like you and potentially this low tolerance of out-group members is due to a need for safety, is due to a need to feel like you belong, is due to a need to having people that understand you because you're finally realizing the oppression and your lack of knowledge of that oppression. I debated with Suzanne about sharing the story, but for me, it's not really until my senior year that I can say that I really experienced this. While in the dissonance stage, the second stage, I really was depressed. And I always talk about the fact that when I was an undergrad, I got a chance to study abroad. What I never really tell people is that my desire to study abroad was a need to run away, was engendered by a need to leave. And when I returned my senior year to undergrad, I was fed up. And I had been listening to I was remembering a lot of what my dad had said to me when I was younger. Be careful, take care of yourself, don't let your spirit be broken down because you don't understand. And I didn't understand. So my senior year, I joined this underground group of Black renegades. And what we used to do is we would meet up, we would do research, and we would create these like pamphlets with messages on them. And messages would say things like, check your privilege at the door, and we would post that on the door into a classroom, for example. Or we would say things like, we're all racist, deal with it. And then we'll have a subliners that say things like, the work is to figure out how it's impacting you and your surroundings. So they weren't like super great, but it made us feel like we were doing something different. But we weren't, we were secret about it. People didn't know who we were. And this created sort of a lot of conversation on campus. We were being talked about in classes, which made us feel really proud. Although it may look like activism, it actually wasn't, and I will talk about that a little bit more in the next stage. But what I want to highlight with this is that it felt empowering. It gave me a sense of purpose that pulled me out of that sense of depression. And that could only happen by me feeding onto that anger that I was experiencing. It can only happen by me surrounding myself with people that understood what was happening and understood how I felt.
So just a word to follow up, that when you have a group of people who are all in the anger stage at once, when there's enough of that, you get a movement. And so we need people to be in this place to create the energy for action and the energy for organizing. And I think that this is a stage that should be cherished and supported. And it's a time when people are motivated. I don't think you said, to do their own sort of research, do a lot of reading and things like this that supported that work that Nellie and her group did. So I think this is an exciting time, and it feels like whites are joining this movement at a greater percentage, which is very exciting. So in contrast to that wonderful stage is this white reintegration stage. So this is the reflecting on the white people who sort of retreated back to white culture, and because maybe they felt rejected by or sort of insulted by Black culture in some way, they have a worse attitude towards Blacks. And actually, it's not just that they're ignoring Blacks, but they have actually a negative activity towards Blacks. Now, some people think that colorblindness fits in the first stage. I think that if you're a child and you're colorblind, that's one thing. But if you're an adult and you're supporting this idea of colorblindness, that you're actually representing aspects of this stage. And I have some quotes here from very recent attendees at the Trump rally. And there was a journalist there who interviewed people who were there with their children. And the children were seeing the Black activists that were right there, and they were protesting systemic racism and police brutality. This is what the parents told their children. They are misinformed. Trump wants the best for all people, including African Americans. We don't see color, and they shouldn't either. So this is where we talk about erasure, where people want to pretend like race and racism doesn't exist. Another quote, I don't think they even understand what they want. Because Black lives do matter. Every life matters. I have lots of white friends and Black friends. I'm out in the oil field. We don't see color. You either work, pull your weight, or you go home. There's no color. And in Robin DiAngelo's book, she considers this colorblindness an aspect of white fragility, that this unwillingness to see the reality of structural racism. For me, let me go over some other things here. One thing that was interesting that happened for me was I went to an elite, predominantly white college, and there weren't as many Black students as I had experienced in high school. And what was really strange for me was when I would come home to Cleveland and go about places I normally would go about, I noticed I was like more afraid of Black people. And so I think that somehow in the absence of that daily interaction with Black people, that like racism was like seeping into me somehow. Now, if people in this stage somehow get into a situation where they do have contact with Black people, or they read something or something happens that triggers their awareness, you know, they may be able to move out of this place. When I was in graduate school, there was a lot of excellent training on multicultural issues. And we would do things like, you know, the power walks where you stand over here if this and stand over there if that. And I was willing to be a bit more honest, I think, about my racism than other people. And so when they said, would you like walk across the street if a Black man was coming, I said, yes, I would. And everybody like, so they want us to be honest and they wanted us to unroot our racism, but then it was like, oh no, no, maybe this wasn't, you know, what am I supposed to do here? And so that was a period of where I was both like struggling and you know, probably experiencing some white fragility, but also I was learning, and there were wonderful people around me to help teach me a fuller perspective.
In this next stage, we have internalization, which is a period of examination. And I want us to think about the first stage again, conformity. And at conformity, we had a devaluing of the Black culture and an adoption of the belief system of the white culture. And then we have dissonance that acted like a slingshot to shoot us all the way to immersion, where we immerse ourselves, emerge ourselves into Black culture completely and sort of like push away the white influence. And then in this stage, Dan, there's with more education, with more understanding, with more ability to grasp the complexity of racial conversation, racial context, racial situation, you begin to examine yourself within this world, and that state and work to a more balanced view of both. And that process is called examination. That process of being able to appreciate, have pride in your culture, understand that there's a lot to be appreciated in the white culture as well, and there's also a lot to be worked on. You're able to appreciate the similarities and the differences between these two groups. That is the fourth stage. In this stage too, I think what's important to note is one's ability to not only better grasp racial discourse and racial injustice, we're also better able to understand other oppressed groups. And we're better able to think in more intersectional ways. So what does it mean to be gay and Black? What does it mean to be bisexual and a woman? What does it mean to be from low SES? And so all of that is better appreciated now. Again, here we have a story from Morgan, and I'll read that to you all. She said, I am worried that with certain movements, cis lives are being centered. With what is going on now, I am concerned that it's not just cis Black lives that matter, but also trans lives. My favorite author, Leslie Feinberg and Audre Lorde, focused their activism on all groups because they realized that you can't create justice in just one sector. I think about them a lot when I have interactions with people. And I try to think about how to make it inclusive, how to make her interactions inclusive, she says, she means. I have a coworker, for example, who is trans, and he can be a lot at 6 a.m. in the morning. He's very young and he's still transitioning. And I try to be more patient with him than my other coworkers. I try to live out my values in my relationships, not just in outward activism.
Okay.
Oh, there you go. Sorry.
Okay, great. All right, so, oh, I guess we're missing our last, well, this is, Janet Helms has sort of 2 extra stages for white people, or 1 extra, and this is pseudo-independence, and this is where a person may have an intellectual commitment, like they believe it's a good idea to support and tolerate other groups and help them, but so they're not actively racist, but they are not necessarily recognizing the white privilege piece, and they maybe haven't had a lot of opportunity to really explore the issue. And I have a client who, actually Nellie also has this client in our group. She's a 65-year-old white woman, and she's managed to get to be 65 and then say to me, you know, I guess I haven't really had to look at race issues until now. And so, you know, so it is possible that people are just not even paying attention. And so she's sort of at this stage, or even the earlier dissonance stage, of what's my responsibility in this and how much do I need to learn about this? We'll go to the next one. Okay, in this stage, the white person is really wanting to learn, is immersing themselves in taking responsibility to follow all those lists that have been posted on the internet, watch this movie, read this book, listen to this podcast. You know, these are the white people who are doing this, and trying to get more of an emotional understanding of what it means to be Black, what it means to be white, what does responsibility feel like. And, you know, I like the word responsibility because it's what is my ability to respond, you know, and that we may all have different strengths and interests and values that will determine the way that we are going to manifest our involvement in Black justice. And so there's not just like one way to do it, but I think a lot of people in the country are here because they're in this intense learning process. And I would say that's where I have been, that when I learned that there were all these new ways of labeling things and thinking about things, and I'm just really lucky that I'm on a lot of emails from organizations. So I have been watching hours and hours of live webinars with Black women leaders and young leaders, and just taking it all in and learning, and you know, podcasts and so on. I'm just trying to absorb and update myself right now so that I can be useful. So, and I think Charlotte has a story for us about that as well.
Yeah, so after George Floyd's murder, I realized that I hadn't asked my friend, who is the only Black student in her graduate program, about how her experience in her first year had been, just sort of assuming that it had been shitty and she'd had to deal with bullshit. And that I should remedy that. I also, sort of, as my mom discussed, started thinking about who I follow on Instagram, and who I listen to, in terms of I listen to podcasts, and expanding and really intentionally, you know, cultivating my news sources and these podcast sources so that they're fully focused on Black perspectives, and currently on activist perspectives and intersectional Black perspectives.
Great, thank you, Charlotte. So people in this stage also sometimes benefit from having a safe Black person to consult with, and to check things out, where that person knows that they're well-intended and is going to take the time. And I think the best way to, if you're going to take that approach, is to ask permission. You know, I have a question about something. Is this something you are willing to talk to me, or do you want to just direct me to something to read, or that you take on the responsibility of going through all those lists that have been shared to find an answer to a particular question. I actually did this very thing recently. There's a woman in Ames who's on the school board, a Black woman, and she had posted something from a colleague about how white women who want to do things related to Black justice need to be mindful of trying to partner with people who are of like this sort of same power level. And I asked her about that. If like I were to do this workshop again, would I need to do that? And she said yes, that I should consider that. So you know, it's an okay strategy. I know that we don't want to put Black people into the position of having to do all the labor of educating us, and personal relationships matter and can be a place for good growth. So I guess just do the best you can with that. Let's see, and we'll go on to the next stage then.
I wanted to add that a hallmark of both of these positions, both in the Black and the white identity development, is one's ability to stay in the conversation even when it gets uncomfortable, and one's ability to be able to take feedback. So it's one thing to be able to ask for, to ask questions, which is great, but also to be able to take that feedback when it's given and not pull up a wall or become defensive when that feedback is being given to you. And a trademark of the pseudo-independence, the pseudo-independence from the other side, from the immersion, is that it can look, I want to use an example, it can look, this is usually in the individuals that have done a lot of research, a lot of work, and they know the text intellectually, but it's hard to put into action. And it could look like what we term like white saviors, for example. People that tend to not, like Suzanne just said, bring others to the table or feel like it's their responsibility to save the poor Black people, or to teach the poor Black people. So that even though there's knowledge, that knowledge is not integrated, which is why it's called pseudo-independence. With the Black integrative awareness, which is the last stage in the Black identity stage, we also call that application. And it's really hard to differentiate it from the fourth stage, the examination stage, because the two really work in tandem with each other. As we continue to examine, as we continue to identify, to look over our belief system and to break down some past belief system and to develop new ones, and we find ways to integrate those into our lives and find ways to apply it, it keeps working on top of each other, because as we're learning new things and developing new identities, we find then ways of applying it to ourselves, applying it to the work that we're doing. And we have a story here from Jan Major, and she stated, attending graduate school has impacted my racial identity development by requiring me to examine my multiple identities and challenge myself to better understand the lived experiences of others and how they are their intersecting identities impact their navigation of the world. There we go. I learned that I had to broaden my ideas of advocacy and social justice. Any sort of oppression of any person is not acceptable. I challenged myself around what ways I unknowingly contribute to continue to perpetuate the oppression against others of different identities and people with similar identities as myself via internalized racism and sexism. While higher education can limit who you interact with due to the inherent privilege of that space, it has exposed me to a variety of people, and I have learned different ways of being. The process of change is inherently difficult and often triggers my defenses, but the work is worth it. And there is no other option in my mind than things have to change. So again, this stage works heavily in tandem, I think, heavily in tandem with the fourth stage, because just as Jen stated, there's having to learn about new identities and having to learn of ways that your own actions are impacting or oppressing others, and having to find new ways then to apply that work, to apply that belief system to your actions, to your work, whether that's through your research, whether that's in your job, whether that's with your family members. It can be really hard, but that combination of examination and application is an important part of the process.
Thank you, Nellie. All right, so the application stage for whites, some hallmarks of this would be that the white person is feeling like they can trust their judgment a bit, that they've done their homework and that they feel like they have some breadth of understanding, but is there still that open-mindedness to new learning? This person is looking at ways to let go of privilege and actively oppose racism. A person in this stage is going to be seeking out cross-cultural interactions, not because they're on a project, but because it's actually enjoyable to them, that they like just having a variety of perspectives, a variety of experiences in their life. This person may be engaged in activism to create structural change. And this person can also feel pride for whatever they feel are positive white values, that you don't have to reject whiteness. You can say, well, these are the things that I think are the strengths and the limitations of having lived within a white culture framework. And, you know, for me, I said before that I feel like I'm more in the fourth stage, except what I was doing, my activism was giving away money where people told me to give away money, and then this workshop. And I'm not sure, like, yeah, so I'm recovering from a foot injury, so I haven't been able to go to marches, but I'm on the, you know, Iowa Black Lives Matter Facebook page, and I'm trying to do what I can to be a part of the solution. So one of the things that we can do now, and I know that our sort of official time is up, it's actually, I need to share one more story with you that I printed out here. Where is it? Nellie, it looks like you had your stuff like up on the screen where you could see it.
Yeah.
All right, well, I'll just wing it then. So I'm gonna be, so Charlotte grew up in Iowa as opposed to Cleveland, Ohio like me, and she's modest. But I will tell you that since Charlotte's been living in my home since March of the COVID, I've been able to observe her be in this application stage. And Charlotte immediately after George Floyd's murder started to create a conversation in her department. So she's just completed her first year of graduate school, and she sent a letter, and she was very careful, first to the students, and then it went to the faculty, and then it was, and it was supported, and then in collaboration with others, she's created a committee where they're going to be looking at ways to change policies and practices that are racist in her department. She's brought to the fore that her whole field of statistics is actually based on racism, that the leading figures that created certain statistical methods, those methods were created for eugenicist, racist research. And so she's bringing that history to awareness, and she's wanting to make the present day different and using the power of the collective of the students to do that. And I'm just proud. And I'm learning from Charlotte, and I'm grateful that she was able to participate, and very grateful for Nellie to do this so last minute, and then my contributors who are willing to talk to me and give me their stories. So I hope that you've been thinking about yourselves and maybe other people you know, And we're going to now open it up. So if Margaret, if you want to open up the chat so people can, and I guess I'll open it up.
Probably I'll open up the chat, and then if anyone wants to speak, you can unmute yourself.
Yes, and I'll call on people so people aren't trying to talk at once because it's so hard to
If you're
see.
able to, in the bottom bar underneath the pictures, there's a little reactions icon. If you click on that, you'll see one of the choices is like to do a thumbs up. So if you want to let Suzanne know that you have a comment by putting a thumbs up there.
Okay, and
or just raise your hand.
Unshare the
Yep.
PowerPoint then?
Working
There we go.
on it.
Okay, great.
There we go.
All right.
And then I'm going to get chat open to everyone.
Okay.
There we go. So that is set back up.
All right. Well, so far nobody is raising their hand or putting their name in the chat. I know this is sort of a typical program for me where I give a lot of information and hope that you'll like chew on it later. So yes, we could send the slides to Carolyn can do that for us. And then you're also going to get the handout that'll reflect more of our spoken explanations that we gave.
So we can distribute that to everyone who was registered on the Eventbrite. If you didn't register through Eventbrite, we don't have your email address. And so you can share your email address here in chat if you did not register on Eventbrite, and I'll make sure you get included in that list.
Oh, okay, good.
Looks like Eve has a question.
Oh, great. Eve, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to say what a useful framework I feel like this is. Everything that that you shared, I mean, especially about white identity, I was able to sort of pinpoint things that have happened to me or experience I've had, you know, in the last year versus throughout my whole life that I felt were described by those categories. And I think it'll be really useful to sort of timeline that out and journal on that a little bit. So thank you I've never heard any of that before.
Oh, good. I'm so glad that there was some new information for you. Thanks for sharing.
Since no one else has their hand raised, oh, do the Warners have their hands raised? Nope, you're clapping. That's wonderful. It was fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I wonder if people would you people like to go into breakout rooms of like 5 people like we did at the beginning of the week and have a chance to discuss in a smaller group?
We don't have breakouts set up.
Oh, we don't. Oh, okay. All right.
When I do in the future, we could definitely put that together.
All right. That's fine.
Can I interject something?
Sorry, go ahead. Jay?
Yeah. Suzanne and
Nellie.
I'm absolutely floored by the way that you folks can put words onto the different stages. It'll take me forever to learn which one is which and where I fit in. But in any case,
that's because I unmuted Connie.
In any case, can you send out to us that list of those words? And
Yeah, they already
if
are.
not the whole thing?
Yep,
Yes.
we will.
Yeah, I plan to chew a good deal.
Melissa and Jay, did you register on Eventbrite or did you join? Yes, so I have your email address. We'll make sure you get it.
I think we said this before, and I think it's worth mentioning that it's quite common to cycle through these stages. And usually what happens is that there's an event that happens, and I think the George Floyd event is a great one that forces us to reflect, and that prompts us into a new way of thinking, a new type of action, a new type of behavior, and essentially we're just like cycling back through them again. So So as you're reflecting back on these, I think you may be able to find multiple times or multiple experiences when you've been in different stages. And again, as I think, as Suzanne said earlier too, we can be at different stages, at different stages at the same time, or even at different stages for different types of identities. So all of those things are important to remember as you all are reflecting on this.
Well, we so appreciate your time and attention to this issue. And if any of you want to do more one-on-one conversation about where you're at or like what your next steps might be or something, you can feel free to email me or personal, I don't know how Facebook works so well, but so, you know, because we're all in this together and we're all good people who care about moral, ethical living, and we got to support each other in this work. So.
Suzanne, Guy has his hand raised.
Oh, lovely. Okay, Guy. Mm-hmm.
Okay, Connie, you got to mute. Okay, did you?
I'll leave the meeting.
Oh, so we don't get the echoey sound. Yeah.
It's
Okay.
because you're in the same room. There's nothing you can do about it if you're in the same room.
Oh, I thought if she unmuted, yeah, we've been, if she's muted. Anyway, she went away. I just keep reflecting on an experience that I've had. We've been traveling the last several winters from Indiana to California by car, taking weeks to do it. And I've been in NAACP locally for many years, and I have a hat. And sometimes when I'm going shopping or out to Kroger's or to the you know, the dump to throw away my trash and stuff, I often wear that hat. And when I'm, and the hat says NAACP,
Oh, okay.
Monroe County. But when I get to West Texas, I don't wear the hat. And to me, I don't call it white skin privilege, I call it white skin convenience. Because it's so convenient to take away that identity. But if I was black, I couldn't have that convenience.
Right, and that's a real emotional understanding that you're bringing to this issue.
Anita has something to say.
You have to unmute yourself. Yep.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay. I found your stages quite interesting, and it brought me back to a General Assembly back in the 60s. You were very young, Suzanne.
I was born in 63, right.
And the General Assembly blew up, actually blew up. They had two groups, BAWA, black and white together, and BAC, just a black conference. And the black people wanted to, I think they were at what you would call the fifth stage. They want to examine their self-race, and internalize who they were. And yet, the BAWA group, the black and white group, I think would correlate to your stage 4, where they wanted to immerse and were sort of still colorblind. And this was back in the 60s, and I thought these stages were interesting and could possibly be applied to that time.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's an excellent observation, Anita.
Margaret and Alec, did you guys have something to say?
Hi, I do have a question. It's kind of an open-ended question, so I'm hoping maybe someone will just speak a little bit about it. We've talked about these stages of identity recognition. And also we've mentioned another important factor, which is the dynamic of social power between two people, and talked about how important both of those things are when you're communicating with someone, especially across racial boundaries. So I wanted to maybe hear you talk a little bit about the relationship between a mismatch in these stages of identity and a mismatch in social power.
Thank you for that question. I have examples, Nellie, but did you want to go first?
Sure. I think I can talk about it in both within the Black community itself and also within across races. I think maybe the story that I shared with me and my dad was a clear example of within the Black community where I am completely oblivious and I'm having to share with another Black individual, and this can even happen with friends, where there's a struggle with making the person understand there is something that's actually happening that you're not aware of, because by default, I am oblivious to it. I think when it's across races and the person in power is the one that is at a lower stage, it can feel very disempowering. And it can feel extremely, disempowering is the best word that I can come up with, because no matter what you try to say and no matter how you try to find ways to describe it, and here's the trick, in me being sort of like the oppressed individual in this case, if we're using racial identity development, and in that other individual being in the position of power, I then have to work to find the way that I'm going to describe this in a way that's going to soothe and attend so that you can hear me. I have to do that work for you. I have to put in the work to make you comfortable enough to be able to listen to what I have to say. And that's hard, right? That's hard to do, because in that position, then you're always running the risk of that not working. So I'm putting that energy in, I am putting that effort in, and I'm being this vulnerable. And then what happens? You still don't hear me, which shuts me down, right? So that can be really hard.
Right, and I can actually give an example of that from somebody at Iowa State. Was a Black woman, was a graduate student at an office and had a white woman as her supervisor, and the supervisor wasn't understanding why an event might need to be an all-Black space, and that it was burdensome on this graduate student to have to try to explain this and then see and then explain it and then see the boss went ahead and violated that space anyway. so that was one experience in that direction. And did you want to share a more specific story, or should I go ahead and share another story, Nellie?
You can share a story.
Okay. So I'm going to share a story where it was okay, where I was the white person in power, and I was working with a Black woman, predoctoral intern, on a program that had a piece of this, but it was about Black and white women's communication style differences. And if you go deeper into the research, there's all these ways that Black women and white women do things differently, and then they miss each other because of that. And one of those is the use of self-disclosure. And so here, Kathleen and I were working very well together, preparing to do a presentation at a national conference, and it was going well. And she had been at a staff party where Aiden and I answered these questions, and it was actually after that, about our relationship, that I thought, oh, I guess we should get married because of the way we answered all these questions. So she knew that I was engaged to be married to Aiden. And then one day I'm in the hallway and I notice she has a diamond engagement ring on her left finger. And had we not actually been working on this workshop, I would have been like, oh, I'm so hurt. Why didn't she tell me? Blah, 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 you know. And I'm like, oh, yeah, this is that difference. She's not going to disclose her personal stuff with me at work. However, when we did do a program together and we were, I think, in her hometown, she drove me around and said, this is the corner where these white kids said this to me. And, you know, once that trust was established, then she did share more about herself. But had I been hurt by that and upset with her, as a person in power, I could have been like, well, I'm not going to write her as good a recommendation, or I'm not going to include her in another workshop or something. But because I understood this difference, I was like, oh, there it is. You know, okay. And so, yeah, and of course, I'm sure there's a lot of other stories that you all may know of about these crosses. And so.
Yeah, I think the trademark to having two individuals in a relationship in an interaction with differing at different stages is one's ability to sit with discomfort. And I think that's always a trademark, because I think it's okay. And I think you will engage regardless of the identity that you're in. You're going to engage with somebody that is not always at the same level with you. And it might be somebody who's at a higher level than you are. It might be somebody who's at a lower level. But I think oftentimes what makes the relationship or that interaction different is one's ability to sit with discomfort within that relationship. Am I able to take feedback and listen to what is being said? Am I able in the moment to recognize what emotions are coming up for me? Am I able to understand potentially what those emotions mean? Can I sit with them in that moment versus act on it and become defense and act on the defensiveness? Can I recognize it and sit with that, for example? If we're able to sit in uncomfortable conversations, we often find that we can come out of that stronger and better and potentially more advanced in our stages. So I think that's a trademark, developing comfort for uncomfortable situations.
Right, and sort of related to that, many of you may have heard the term white tears, which is talked about in Robin DiAngelo's book, White Fragility. And there's a common sequence of events that can happen. And this can happen outside of racial domains as well. And it's where you have a perpetrator, a victim, and a rescuer. And unfortunately, what will happen too often is that maybe there's a meeting and a Black person says to a white person, you know, that actually wasn't quite on point, that has a racist implication. So then if the white woman starts crying, and there's lots of reasons white women are socialized to cry in these situations, but if she starts crying, then it positions the Black person giving the feedback as now the perpetrator instead of the victim. And then what can happen then is that people will come in and try and rescue the white woman who's crying instead of still attending to the original complaint. And so you have to sort of watch for that interaction and be prepared to interrupt that and redirect it to repairing the situation or the relationships for the Black person who has been injured by the comment. And you know, I know how bad shame feels. It's just this it's just like the ickiest feeling. And I was leading a workshop on class issues, and I'm a career counselor, and I said something about how where people work might like share their preferences or their values. And somebody said, oh, nope, Suzanne, that was a classist statement, you know, because for a lot of people where they work has nothing to do with their interests and values. And, you know, and I'll admit, like, I had that little shame reaction. It was very uncomfortable, but I didn't act out because I'm like, oh my God, she's right, you know. I just like totally missed that. So like what Nellie is saying is like, yeah, you know, I felt uncomfortable, but boy, I was so grateful that she corrected me, because now that's one less way I will be classist. So yes, it's uncomfortable. And if you know, as a therapist, I struggle with how much discomfort around this issue to sort of have with my clients. And so, you know, because they're already in a lot of discomfort right now. And so I understand if you're in a place where you can't add more discomfort to your life, then just do what you need to do to heal and strengthen yourself. And then when you're ready to enter in, then you enter in.
And Suzanne,
Yes.
We have a question in chat.
Okay.
Marianne, I'm guessing Marianne Pogenberg says, I feel like I'm flipping between Disintegration and Immersion 2 and 5. What resources can you recommend to help me with 5?
Okay, so I will maybe send, there's so many lists now. I will look in my emails that I've been sending to my clients and share that with APC so they can share that with you all. And so we'll make a list available. Yeah.
She says, thank you.
Okay, great. So I appreciate that you all have stayed an extra period of time, and we'll wait and see if anybody else has any more questions before. Oh, Pam has a comment. Go ahead, Pam.
Hi, nice to see everybody, and thank you for the presentation. Yeah, I was wondering if along with the YouTube video, you could send some suggestions on things to read. I heard you mention White Fragility, and I had to read that at work last year, and I'm saying had to because I thought, oh God, I have to read this book. And I didn't like the title, and I thought, I already know this. And I found it to be a life-changing book, and I learned a lot about myself. And so I'm thinking a lot of us probably want to keep moving forward, and so I'm hoping that you could include some resources that you thought would be good, since you, Suzanne, you know the group. I mean, you know a lot of the people, and so you could probably think of something appropriate. And Nellie, you probably have some resources as well, and perhaps your daughter, Suzanne, but we Unitarians do like to read.
Yeah, absolutely. And the good news, for a period, you couldn't buy the book White Fragility in paper. However, there is like an hour and 20-minute YouTube video that's excellent of that. So I'll it's just really hard to like take, I don't know, does anybody know how to do YouTube video? Like I go up there to grab the thing, and it's like hugely long. So maybe I'll just say, look it up and describe it, because that's a quick way to get an introduction. Yeah.
And another, another thing I just happened to watch at a workshop today for my job was called Abolitionist Teaching by Bettina Love. It was a discussion between her and a few other women. And it was really, really interesting if you're interested in education and Black excellence. So that was really good. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's a relatively new video. It's been made since COVID.
Okay, well, I guess what I'm hearing from many of you is that maybe you want us to provide lists based on what stage you might be in. So that'll take a little bit of time for me to work on that, but I'll consider that.
I think maybe this is going to sound like a super easy tip, but it's not. And I think it applies to all stages. And it kind of goes back maybe to what Suzanne was saying with sort of the culture in Iowa to want to be proper, to not make mistakes, and to be nice, and to avoid to be racist. So this tip is this: you're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. So do not avoid not making mistakes, because in fact, that's what usually leads to this cycle of avoidance and non-interaction that usually perpetuates the system. Your willingness to make mistakes and to learn from them will help. So stay engaged, and by staying engaged, you would inevitably make mistakes. Just learn from those mistakes. And we all do, I myself.
Thank you, Nellie. There's one more question from Jay Warner. Oh, you're muted though, Jay. I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah, see if I can keep it in mind long enough. It seems to me that making progress along those stages takes a great deal of introspection or at least self-awareness, which is something that a lot of us do our best to avoid. What I'm really worried about at the moment is if I run into somebody who is not totally eager to make these discoveries about themselves, what can we offer them? What can I offer them to let them know that on the other side there is this fantastic place and they'll be so much better off?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know that we're saying, I mean, some people will not be better. I mean, some people who give up white privilege may not be better off individually, which is, why some people are resisting this, but collectively we will all be better off. I think you take the thing that the person has just said, whatever it is, and you say, well, gosh, actually, were you aware of blah, blah, blah? And then after you share that, you can say, so, how does that, of course, this is very jargony, how does that land for you? But you could say, what happens for you when you think about that, if you have to take in that fact? And, or you can say the direct thing, like, oh, it may not have been your intention, but when you express that view, it came across as sort of supporting a belief in white supremacy, or it seemed like that could really hurt a Black person were they to hear you say that, or, but if you sort of acknowledge it, you can soften it by just saying it may not have been your intention, but this is the impact. So like people who put Confederate flags on their lockers in high school,
Right.
And, so you don't, oh, thank you, Cheryl. So there's ways to calmly sort of acknowledge, like, oh, this is where you're at. Okay, so let's just take you like one little bit further than maybe where you are. And there was a guy I met, I was out canvassing, which is why my foot's hurting me. And he was a Republican, and I was there to see his Democratic wife. And he's like, well, I just think we Republicans and Democrats want the same thing, but we have different ideas about how to get there. And I said, well, and so we had this exchange, and he said, okay, well, I'll watch this movie you suggested if you'll watch this movie I suggested. And so that was the way we handled it. And so there's different ways to approach it. Are there specific situations you want to know how to respond to?
Not at the moment, but I'm noticing in some of the discussions that I'm having that I'm looking for saying, okay, this is something that's what I think of as an improvement. And as you point out, they may not think it's an improvement at all. On the larger issue, for example, of immigration and a few other things, the action which would be most beneficial for the country as a whole is to quit arguing about the immigrants and let's start letting lots more of them in. Okay, if I'm going to say this, I have to be able to explain to people how they will benefit by this. And the same is true of trying to persuade somebody to have a slightly different viewpoint, hopefully less prejudicial viewpoint, toward another ethnic group which is not theirs.
Right. So we can appeal to either self-interest, or we can appeal to a moral value. And it's not, if you know a person, you can say, well, given that you value this or you care about this, it might follow that you would also care about this and think this.
Yeah.
But yeah. So the self-interest approach has its limits. But you can decide based on the person which way you're going to go. Nellie?
Yeah, I was going to say, Jay, I think you bring a good point, especially around the idea of the difficulty in trying to persuade someone else. And I think maybe that's the trick. If the focus of the conversation is on the persuasion and not on, which is going to sound contradictory, but not on listening, then usually the conversation is over even before it started. you stated it so beautifully when you started. Like, it's hard for us to self-reflect and to engage in these like very internal, thoughtful conversation. And we are the ones sort of like doing the work. So can we imagine how much harder it might be for other people to do this type of work? So listening is so important. It is so, even if it is an idea that you do not agree with, listening and being able to ask questions and even being curious about that individual's beliefs. Where are your ideas coming from? What are some of the assumptions that you're making behind those ideas? Where did you learn that? I'm curious to understand how you developed that idea. I'm curious to understand what the purpose of this is for you. Because then you in that case, you not only understand the individual, you not only understand the issue, the perspective, but also the individual. And when you do that, you build rapport, and it allows you to make comments that would allow you to be heard by that individual without feeling like it's defensive or you're trying to persuade them, because you've already demonstrated that you can listen and you can now share your perspective. So listening is actually so important, and being curious about that other individuals is also can also be really helpful. And I do believe that being knowledgeable, which is why it's important to read and to do your research, being knowledgeable comes in handy, because when you get to know how the belief system developed, when you get to know the assumptions, then you can maybe gently challenge them. And you can say, that's interesting. I thought you might say that. Did you actually know that blah, 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 blah? It didn't actually happen the way that you said. This is actually what happened. I'm curious if that changes anything for you or what you think about that. And it's a conversation. You're not trying to persuade, you're just having a conversation. So I do believe that being knowledgeable about the topic matters quite a bit.
Yes, it does.
Okay, well, thank you, Jay. So I am aware of the time. So we should probably wrap up. Again, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Margaret, for your technical help tonight, and Carolyn for setting things up, and Nellie for doing this on 6 days notice with me. So, and Charlotte doing this on less than 24 hours notice. So I hope everybody has a great time, and I'll look forward to seeing you at other events this week that we're together at MUUSA, and imagining that I'm seeing you guys all on the beach and on the little road to our opening ceremonies. And so be blessed and take good care, everybody.
Right.
Thank you for attending, everybody.
Thank you.
And Nellie, why don't you join my Zoom room and we'll debrief.